Hello, everyone. We are live today with Susan Wiggs, a New York Times bestselling author of Family Tree and the Oysterville Sewing Circle. She's joined today by executive editor Rachel Kahan, who edits Susan's books. So they'll be talking about their relationship, the Oysterville Sewing Circle, and Susan's upcoming book, The Lost and Found Bookshop, which is coming July of 2020. So much ground to cover. Of course, submit any questions or comments along the way, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But until then, we'll dive right into the interview. Enjoy.
Hi. I think that a lot of times when I talk with readers, they're really curious to know how the author comes up with their ideas, how the book gets made, and they know that authors and editors work together, but they don't necessarily know what we do. So we thought that we would use this opportunity on Library Love Fest to pull the veil back a little bit on the editor-author relationship, talk a little bit about how we work, why it's a really important relationship, and just tell you about what we do so that you have a better sense of what goes on behind the scenes about a year before the book arrives in the bookstore and into your hands. A little bit about each of us. I have been editing for, let's just say, more than 20 years. And Susan has...
I've been writing for more than 30 years.
More than 30 years. And
yeah.
how many books? Do you remember what
More
number
than 50 books.
Is?
And I think Oysterville is in the high 50s. So I've been at it for a while. I write between 1 and 2 books a year and have done for, like I said, the last 30 years. And it's been... so gratifying, and in that span of time, I've worked with many, many editors. I have a personal favorite right here, Rachel, and this is like the perfect time to talk because we just finished a book together. Mm-hmm. We're about to embark on the next one together, and so it's kind of an interesting time when we actually intersect because in between, we go for months and months without really needing to touch base until we come to that part in the book where the creative team really gets together.
So why don't we can talk a little bit because this is the most recently finished book, The Oysterville Sewing Circle. For all of you out there who've been buying it, thank you because the response has been amazing to this book, and we're really grateful. This is a book that is really close to my heart and I think to your heart too because it came at a moment, which wasn't entirely by design, but it came at a moment where it wound up being perfectly timed for the cultural conversation that we find ourselves in about the Me Too movement and about harassment and domestic violence and speaking up and sort of how women support other women through all of these things. And so, Susan, can you tell me about when you first got the idea for this book, and then we can talk about how the timing kind of came together?
The timing was just serendipitous for my creative process and for the book. I had the idea probably 4 years ago. It was a bit half-baked, but I was very passionate about the setup for the book. A woman who is an independent designer, and she has all these great high-flown ambitions, and she ends up with a friend who's caught up in a terrible situation of domestic violence and some other things. And so, and that was the start of her journey. And so, usually the first thing that I talk to Rachel about is the beginning, middle, and end, the themes that I'm going to touch on. And she helps me refine my ideas. And then I go away for a good long time. And then she gets what I call my mess in progress. And it's I always write all my books out by hand. They're handwritten in big notebooks. And then when I have that draft, hopefully I haven't lost it or the house hasn't burned down because it's the only copy. And so, and I've actually, when I had, I think it was during this book or maybe the previous book, I hadn't typed up my pages in a really long time. And so I started storing the manuscript in the freezer because I thought if the house burns down, that would be like the
freezer will survive.
Yes,
we can open the door.
My book will still be in there,
pages.
yes. And then eventually I do type them up, sometimes by dictating. And but then I have a draft that feels like a book, but is in a rough form. And that's when Rachel's intuition and her creativity and her artistry really supports me in the next step, because revision is really revision. You reimagine the book. You don't just turn the word red to scarlet, or said to reply. We're talking about the big themes, whole characters. I think we might have even eliminated characters or something, moved things around in the book, moved a whole timeline around.
Yeah, changed characters' names, all kinds of things.
Yeah, and this one, though, was that rare book that got to keep its title. Sometimes I'll turn in a book with my working title, and people in sales don't like it, or it sounds like some other book, or it just doesn't work. And so, but this one, that's always been the title, and that's not always the case. And so then Rachel, she reads it lightning fast. I remember I was away for about a week somewhere, and I came back, and there was your email saying, "Oh, I had some time. I read the book." And she's incredibly supportive, I assume with all authors, but I get, these words that talk about her feelings and what emotions you felt, and, your affection for characters, and you love the setting, followed by 4 single-space notes of revision.
I mean, I think the editor's role really is you come to it not as a critic, because you don't... I'm not there to be harsh. I'm there to be the reader. And so a lot of times, even in the notes that I give to Susan or my other authors, I'll say, the reader wants to know this. And of course I mean myself, but in that sense, I'm kind of the universal reader. And this is what I've been doing for a long time. So it's something that I've cultivated. But you really, as an editor, you try to think about the people who are going to be picking this book up in a bookstore. How can I improve this book to just give them the most? How can I make this book like the quintessence of what this book can be? And I love that
Aspiring
word.
editors should hear that, because she thinks with the reader's mind. And when you're the author and you've written this, you need that level of feedback, and not somebody just telling you how nice it is or being so critical, but bringing out the things that resonate the most deeply with a reader. And that's a real gift, because not everybody can do that, and I appreciate that I get to work with somebody who can.
Yeah, I really, and a lot of it is saying, I really love all these things about it, and here's what I think it would take to make it even better. And to be fair, when you're working with someone like Susan Wiggs, who has done 50-odd books, there's a lot less heavy lifting on the editor's side.
Is there?
Because I do about 20% of the writers I publish every year are first-time novelists mainly. Sometimes
That's
also
amazing.
Nonfiction writers. Yeah, I still.
20%.
So I mean, I work with people who've been doing this for a really long time and are at the top of their game, like Susan. And then I work with people who are newcomers, who it's their first novel or maybe their second or third novel, which is still really early in a writer's career. And
it's a learning curve.
It is a learning curve. And I was saying to this one author who I'm now editing her 4th book, we did so much heavy lifting on her first book. I mean, I was in there line editing and helping to rewrite things, and really my hand was heavy in that book, because she needed the help to kind of get it to its maximum potential. And I'm working on her 4th book now, and I wrote her the editorial letter, and I was like, I just want us to take a moment to think about how far you've come since that first book, because you'll notice there's just a lot less red ink on this manuscript, and the editorial letter is a lot shorter, because writers are really intelligent, intuitive people, and they learn as they do, the same way the rest of us do. So you're going to be, it's like, it really is practice makes perfect, and the more you do it, it's not to say that every single book is going to magically be this much better and this much better, just like every great athlete does not, dominate every single game, but there's always going to be upward progress if you're really working on it. And so with a book like Oysterville, I think we did 2 edits. We did one that was like the forest edit, where we really got in there, and that was where we changed bigger
We did. We changed the
things,
timeline.
Right?
And this one starts with epigraph pages that start with a quote, and they were sort of spread out through the book, and it turned out, she had a suggestion, let's start with this most dramatic send off first, and so we kind of rearranged everything, and then you re-edited that version,
right?
Saint Rachel.
Really, the second one was pretty easy going. The second one was sort of just buffing to a polish.
Yes, and but that was all, props to Rachel for having the patience to get through it, but it's all to the good. And like you said, we've had such a great reader response to this book.
Yes.
I'm really gratified.
So then this book, as I was pitching it, which is the other part of my job, aside from working with the authors, is I work with our sales force, our marketing people, to think about how we're going to publish this book and what is its message and who is it going to resonate with and what's the best way to make sure people know about this book and why they should read it. And so we talked a lot. It was just as things were really coming out in the media about the Harvey Weinstein stories in the New York Times and the New Yorker and the confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh. And we were talking about all these things, and this book really speaks to those, to sort of women's experiences and all the things that I think women were feeling and talking about on social media and on the news and in chat groups and in book groups. And so it was, in that sense, really relevant and a very easy sell. And I was really gratified, like our salespeople and booksellers, who were the first people to see it after Susan and I are done, they came back and they said, wow, this is really amazing, because this is just talking about like what everybody's talking about right now. And that was not completely by design. I think that maybe there was something in the air that we sort of sensed that.
It's true, yeah. And when I would go through the book, there are places where it progressively got angrier in places and then sweeter in other places. And a lot of that was what was happening around us, and so it was the book had its moment. And another moment was when another thing, and maybe you could talk more about this. She pitches it in the sense of when it's going to come out and what her list of books is going to look like, but also what to emphasize in the book package, like the flap copy right here, and what it's going to look like. And I was really impressed by her insights for getting author endorsements, because some books, if you're authors are first and foremost, we're readers. We love to read. And so when we get somebody's yummy new book, before anybody else gets to read it, we're often more than happy to give a blurb, even though sometimes it's, we don't always have time. But she picked Lisa Wingate, Adriana Trajani, Jennifer Cavarini, and
I think
there was one more. Was that?
More?
Yeah, no, those. Yeah, I thought they were really good choices for cross-pollinating readers.
Yeah, I mean, we always there's this whole little ecosystem of the blurb. So as a reader, when you see that some author has like given this really lovely endorsement on the front cover of a book, that's something that authors do because they are book lovers, and also because they're members of a community and they support one another. At least we hope to. There are some authors who don't support other authors and don't give blurbs. You know who you are. And then there are people like when I talked with Lisa Wingate about this, she just really, she knew it, she got it before We Were Yours. Her big bestseller had just been out. And it also deals with some of the themes of orphans and loss and that kind of thing that are also in the Oysterville Sewing Circle. So she was an ideal person to reach out to readers and say, this is really something you should read. And readers, I think, were especially receptive. So we were extra grateful to her. And she's just someone who's read your work. And, authors, especially when they've been doing this for as long as Susan had, like, they know each other and they want to support each other. And it's
super
really
fun
a nice thing.
to be a fan of
You're
somebody.
You're an insider, too.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So that was one of the things, I mean, if you look at the package, that was one of the things we put together. We also had a tagline on the front cover, and this is something that actually in the course of my career, has changed. We didn't used to do this as much. A tagline is kind of like the slogan you would see on a movie poster. For this book, it's "We believe you, we believe in you," which I think is something that the characters sort of use as their slogan for this domestic violence
in their support group. That I think that line came up, and I thought it was a bit risky, just because it's a bit different. Usually, it's like, everybody has secrets, ...
Yes, exactly. Or, love conquers all.
Yes,
and it's usually sort of meant to give you a little intriguing hint of what the book is about.
No, you took a risk, and I think it resonated with people. I think it kind of
I think it did. I thought, if we were really gonna do a book about this topic, that is the thing that people were really talking about, and that was so relevant for this book. So I was really happy with how that turned out.
Well, the whole package was good, and one of the big surprises for the author, and usually it's a lovely surprise, is you get now it's an email. You get an email with attachments, and it says, "Here's what we think we're going to do for the cover design." And this one had such a journey. We had such a
lot of different looks
range,
for this book.
because there were some that focused on the setting of the book. Oysterville is a real place, but not very many people have been there, because it's one of the most remote places in the very western part of Washington State. And so it's very evocative visually. And so there were some looks that focused on that. There were some looks that focused on like fabric swatches, some cozy looks. There was like a teacup and things like that. And then this one just really sort of popped off the page, just the contrast and, just the sharpness of the bleeding pin, I call it. It kind of hints at a bit of conflict there. So that one, I think, was the one everybody could agree was going to be the best look for this hardcover book.
And that's a big part of what authors and editors do too, is they negotiate things like jacket design, and sometimes it's really easy. Sometimes you see a first draft of it and you're like, that's great.
Yes.
That's all I want.
Yes.
Or like, I just want to change the font on the lettering. And
I would say the paperback version that's coming out next year of that, we didn't even
we just sort of looked at it, and it was great for the mass market edition. But there's so much messaging that goes on with the package of a book, and there are a lot of different options and different directions you can go in. The packaging, in a lot of ways, is a shorthand that tells the reader something about what's going to be in the book, or just kind of beckons the reader a little bit closer. And it's hard to get it right sometimes. So I spend a lot of time talking about it with my authors. We have a really good, talented group of art directors who create the covers, or sometimes they hire artists to create the covers, and then they come to us with an array of things, and a group of us sit in a meeting and say, that won't work, there's another jacket that looks just like that. We talk about it, and then I'll pick, sometimes it's one that's really stood out and send it. Sometimes I'll maybe send 2 or 3 and say, these are some different options. What do you think? And that's a big part of the author-editor relationship. It does go beyond more than just the text inside the covers.
Well, and if you can have an advocate who will go to a meeting and characterize the book, because the people who are hearing this normally haven't even read it, and so they just need to know, how to put your best foot forward. And I love that it's they talk about the whole package. I mean, a book it's got a front cover, but there's also the spine, and we have our little button on the spine. And then Rachel went the extra measure and gave me one of my favorite things. These are called end papers.
Yeah,
and yes, I love the
get the holes.
The beautiful. I don't know. It just kind of
vintage
adds
sewing.
a luxury little touch there that just, I don't know, it just made me so happy. So I love end papers. I think we're a bit geeky about. Oh, and then the other thing I loved, I don't know who came up with this. Maybe you can tell us. Inside, what do you call the decorated pages?
You mean?
Yeah, like the spots.
Sure, like on the title page.
Yeah, and then my dedication page. This is like the best dedication page.
Yeah,
ever.
that was.
It says for the survivors.
That was the interior designer.
And yes, whoever designed the interior. It's subtle, but it says something. So it just because when I read a hardcover book, especially, a lot of books don't strike me that way. But when I'm reading a hardcover book, It's more than just reading the story.
Yeah, you want it to be a package.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. So Susan, Rachel, a lot of people are asking. Donna Wilder is curious about your upcoming book as well, and we're talking about the publication process. So we're early on this. Could you talk about the Lost and Found Bookshop?
So the Lost and Found Bookshop, we have finished editing, and that one, I think that there was more kind of heavy lifting
there was.
in that one, don't you think?
I rewrote it a lot.
Yeah.
I spent 6 weeks. It was my life. I thought it was going to be 2 or 3 weeks, but once I dove in to your very helpful notes, I really went deeper with some things. I added scenes, and so, but I still finished it on time for it to come out next July.
That's right. Do you want to tell the people, give them the brief?
Yeah. So this one,
this is just a bounce.
Yeah.
This is not what it's going to look like when you go to buy it in the store.
She's going to go to her art director
don't even have
meeting,
a cover yet.
and they're going to come up with what should it look like when it goes out. With a title like The Lost and Found Bookshop, there are many directions you can go, but that book itself was it's one of these very multifaceted books, but it's one woman who she starts it starts with, well, I don't want to say with a bang. It starts with this moment of very high, awful crisis in her life, and she ends up having to scramble. She inherits a failing bookstore in old San Francisco, and the building's falling apart, and her grandfather is falling apart. He's having memory issues, and she's worried about him, and she's worried about and she's like this ultra stressed out woman who finds her in the middle of all this. She figures out that one reason that she's so stressed out is that she's been kind of living the wrong life. She was very focused on what she thought she should be doing, not what she wanted to be doing. And I think people who are in that place tend to question themselves and question everything. And people are just going to relate to Natalie so much. She's very torn between being responsible and productive and walking this straight and narrow path and, being in charge of this crazy bohemian bookshop that's falling apart, and things are falling out of the walls, and Granddad's falling apart. And so it's kind of the story of how she pulls herself together and meets one of the most fun aspects was to populate the book with people like you, the readers who wander into the bookstore, the book groups, somebody who wants coffee, the little kid who can't wait for the next Trevor Dashwood book. He's my made-up famous author, Trevor Dashwood, and he does look like Trevor Dashwood. Yeah. And then another little Easter egg hunt that I put in the book is, I think every book that I cited or mentioned in the story, except 2, are real books by friends of mine. So, yeah, that was kind of a fun aspect. Yeah. But I'm really eager for people to get that in their hands. It's one of those books for true book lovers.
And I mean, I think that it also, with Oysterville, you were talking about real experiences in women's lives, things that resonate with them, and not just the puppies and kittens and romance kind of thing. I mean, I found it so affecting to read the character of the grandfather in Lost and Found Bookshop, who's really suffering from memory loss, and I've lost a couple of loved ones to dementia, and sort of watching her make those incredibly painful and difficult decisions about where should he live and how should he be cared for and what's her responsibility to him. And at the same time seeing the love and affection that's still there between them. And I feel like Oysterville touched on something that a lot of people have been living with and maybe not talking about, and I think this book could open up that conversation as well.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and my mom is experiencing a lot of memory issues right now, and she's my number one fan, always has been, big reader, loves to read, and she was actually rather good humored about it. I remember I said, "Well, can I pick what's left of your brain?" And she's tasteless like me, so she laughed.
So she thought that was a good
my
idea.
God, yeah. She's very proud to, be featured in this, and but it brings a real personal touch, and actually, there was a really, really improbable fantasy element in the first draft.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you, and Rachel pulled me back from the precipice of going down that way and made it a lot more authentic in the second draft.
Yeah, I think that's...
Without spoiling anything.
I'm trying not to spoil things, but I do think, a part of, as I said, if you as an editor think of yourself as the universal reader and the first person who's kind of going to read this and what your response is, there was a particular moment in this book where I thought, oh, that's just a little bit too neat and tidy, and life is not that neat and tidy.
You were right.
And so it's time to just let it sort of let it hang out and let it be realistic, because that was
my
what
wish
people are
fulfillment,
living with.
and that's why it's so good to have a creative partner, so that you're not all alone on this, with this book, because at some point you need judgment, and that's what she's for.
That's right. And I mean, that's a real part of, as an editor, you want to be working with authors who say, oh, thank God, okay. You saved me from myself, because some of what we do is save authors from themselves and from sort of the most wildly creative. And then ultimately, when you do that, they come back with something that's even better. I've never known a situation where authors didn't rise to the occasion and say, oh, you're right, but I can do this. And that's really gratifying.
Well, you're good about pointing out the issues, but leaving it up to the author to address it and revise it. So that's,
Susan, one question we have is, so you talked about your mother and kind of injecting her into the story. What's that process, what's that process like, reflecting personal experiences into your novels, and is that helpful to you in a way emotionally, or?
I was just thinking about that, because when I write, I'm probably working things out for myself, and I haven't been in a lot of therapy, but I've been in, I've talked to therapists and had counseling for various things, throughout my life, and they almost always say, well, write something down. Write down your feeling. Well, I do that every day.
Yeah.
And so it could be, keeping me out of therapy. But it's true. You're working things out on paper, and it comes pretty naturally to a writer, but I can't recommend it enough to anybody to verbalize what's going on inside. And there's almost always something really, really personal and deep in each book that I write, but it looks so different that, you'd never connect me to it. Maybe the most personal thing is about a 5-year-old boy or something like that. And so it sort of morphs and takes on a life of its own. But you're right. The really heartfelt pieces of the story come from somewhere. There's a book that I recommend not just writers to read, but book lovers to read, called On Writing by Stephen King. The Stephen King. So you probably all have it. But that book, in that book, there's a section where he talks about that, and he said a writer only really writes about 3 or 4 things, and they keep coming back to them time and time again, but in different stories and different forms. And I really believe that. I think that we all have our the things that are most powerful that we write about, and they have to be powerful to write. What is this, like 110,000 words or something? That you go to every day like a job. It had better feel important to you. So thanks for that question.
Okay, and I guess just one extra question related to your process then. So with something like the Oysterville Sewing Circle, where you're tackling a really hard topic, so you finish that book and you step away, is that then, do you feel you're going to return to that subject matter in a future book? Like, how do you decide when a subject's done?
I might, but it would be much different. I have written books that have spin-offs or spin-off characters, but I don't know that I would ever emulate this experience again, but there's always characters, who have troublesome lives. And so, I absolutely would. And based on what I hear back from readers about this, it's worth a conversation, and it's worth examining from all facets. So, I could. The other thing I did in this book, there's just a real little glimpse of an Easter egg from a past book that resonated
Cameo.
with readers.
Yeah.
A little cameo appearance.
Favorite character cameo.
Yeah, in the Bella Vista Chronicles, which took place in Sonoma, there was a woman who is a provenance expert for an auction house, and she knows how to value antiquities. And so she gets a couple walk-on moments, and we catch up with a few things in her life. Tess from the apple orchard.
Did you want to talk a little bit about the response to the Oysterville Sewing Circle? Because that's kind of the last, what closes the loop is there's the editor and the author relationship, and then it goes out to readers. And nowadays, really, with social media, we get so much feedback. It used to be when I first started in the business, we would get like envelopes in the mail that had letters in them, and now they go directly to your website, to your Facebook page, to Instagram.
Yeah, it's extremely gratifying, and it's sometimes quite distracting. So I have to try to limit myself to only letting myself like interact a little bit, because it could eat up my whole day. But I do love hearing back from readers, the really thoughtful feedback, good and bad. I mean, you hear from everybody, and everybody who reads a book reads a different book, because you're part, the reading is a really creative process if you think about it, because you're reading a book from your perspective. And so the things that jump out at you as a reader might be totally different from what the author was thinking when she was writing. And so it really illuminates bits to me. And the other thing that's really a great moment for me is when I listen to the audiobook, because it feels like a different book. It feels a lot fresher for me. I'm sick of it by the time it makes print. And so the reader responses to this one have been really, really gratifying and sometimes heartbreaking. But one of the most memorable things that happened with this book is I gave a talk at a library, and a reader came up to me and she had written a note to me, and she also wanted to meet me in person. And she said that she had a friend who was in a very, very scary, troubling, violent relationship, but she wasn't close enough to the friend to figure out how to approach her about it, because she knew, but the friend wasn't saying anything, and she didn't know how to approach it. So she gave her the book and said, read this book and let's go for coffee or something like that. And the friend did, and she got, out of that situation, and I was just kind of gave me chills. And I thought, a book can really be a powerful thing if it gets to the right person at the right time. So that was a memorable moment.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe just a few more questions, if that works. Okay, so one question is for Rachel. Do you enjoy, for both of you actually, do you enjoy the editorial process, or do you find it stressful? Meaning, are you nervous or excited by the challenge, or both?
I don't find it really stressful, because this is what I do, and I've been doing it for a long time. So it's just part of what I do. I think I get really excited when I read something and see the potential. And there are definitely times where I look at it like, wow, okay, we've got our work cut out for us. But it doesn't. My job is to hopefully have that excitement, find ways to make it better, and work with the author. So it's not really something that keeps me awake at night too much.
Yeah, no, I've been stressed out and nervous by reactions to things, but that was a long time ago. I've kind of got used to the process now. But it is, you're very vulnerable when you have, especially a first draft and you're new to an editor. You just hope that she will get you and lead you in the right direction. And so, but I don't mind being vulnerable to a process that I really love. But I have a question for Rachel. Another thing an editor does is that she mentioned earlier that she about 20% of her books that she publishes are early books or first books or something like that. So when you're introduced to a new author, is that a submission from a literary agent, or do they contact you directly, or do you go looking for them?
It's always submissions from a literary agent, because HarperCollins, the company I work for, and the other big five publishers, all of our authors for the most part, come to us through literary agents, because you need to have a literary agent to represent you when you contract with a publisher. So I have spent a long time developing relationships with agents, and they know what I like. I know who has the kind of authors that I publish and the kind of work that I publish. And so when they have something that will be right for me, they send it to me. So that's how I get to know the authors. Every now and then I'll get a tip. Like, I actually did wind up publishing a wonderful book that was a good friend of mine said, my mother has an agent and she's written a novel, and would you be willing to look at it? And I kind of knew the mom a little, so I said, okay, I'll have her agent send it to me, and I did wind up buying the book. But really, it's a very standardized, professionalized process in a lot of ways. And so the authors I usually wind up reading the manuscript that's sent to me, or sometimes it's a proposal if it's nonfiction. And then if I'm interested in buying the book, almost every time I'll have a conversation with the author before I try to buy the book, and I'll talk with them about, this is what my vision for the book is, and say, these are the things I loved about your book. This is my vision for how we would publish it, how we would kind of shape your career. Because at the end of the day, the editor is still really in service to the author's vision. It is not... I'm not the creative person. I am here to help the creative person realize their vision for the book. And so if my vision isn't aligned with that writer's, that's not going to end well. So it's sort of like dating before marriage. You try and have conversations where you figure out if you're on the same page. And every now and then I will talk with an author, and they'll say either, I don't, that's not really how I see it. Or I one time had an author say, I have worked on this book for 10 years and I know every single word of this book by heart, and there is no way I could bring myself to change any of it. And I just thought, okay, that is a valid, if you feel that way, that's fine, but then we're not going to be able to work together, because that's not, I've never met a book yet that I thought was at the apex of perfection and couldn't stand to change even a single word. But there's a big bestseller that will go unnamed, where I had a long conversation with the author and just said, this scene and this sort of direction didn't really sit right with me. What if we made it more this way? And she listened very nicely, and we had a really nice conversation, and she ultimately chose to go with another publisher, and the book was really successful. And that's also okay. It's that I was not going to maybe be the best partner for her with that book. So that's how I meet the new authors. And if it sounds like we're a good match, then I talk to the agent and I try and buy the book.
All right. I think one last question then. Susan, Peter Jansen just says, I love that the Lost and Found Bookshop is set in a bookstore. Is it patterned on any particular bookstore? And also, what is your favorite bookstore, if you're willing to name one?
Okay. So my sentimental favorite bookstore is Shakespeare and Company on the Left Bank in Paris. It was founded by Sylvia Beach, and Sylvia the cat in this book is named after Sylvia Beach. And it's the ultimate old, funky, pokey, dark bookstore. When I was a teenager, I lived there. My family lived overseas, and that was my bookstore where I would find books in the English language, and it was just a treasure trove. And it's barely changed. I still love going back there. And so that's my sentimental favorite. My hometown bookstore on Bainbridge Island, Washington is called Eagle Harbor Book Company. And I love them because I can do a remote signing. A reader can order from their website and say, I want Susan to sign this to my Aunt Miriam or whatever, and I'll ride my bike up to the bookstore or whatever and do a sign. So that's my hometown bookstore. And starting in 2020, one of my best author friends, Suzanne Selfers, is taking over Liberty Bay Books in Paulsbo, Washington. She's going to be the owner of a bookstore as well as an author. And so those are among my top three. Now, the one in this book, it very significantly survived the San Francisco earthquake and fire of 1906. About 20% of the buildings, I think, survived. It was still standing, but it, you know, fell into a derelict state and it was lost. And, you know, there's a whole saga about how the family reclaimed that building. And so it's patterned after, there's a street, and the name escapes me. The street in the book is made up, but there's a street that's got the old townhouse, the very straight ones, and some of them have enameled wrought iron fronts, and it just looks like the quintessential old San Francisco with the apartment in the top. I've always romanticized about living above, you know, in this cozy little apartment above the bookstore, and there's a tiny garden in the back. And the garden is actually patterned after my literary agent's garden at the Jane Rosen Agency.
Yeah.
So, so it's kind of a patchwork of bookstores that I've known and loved, and it's one. And it also, in HarperCollins Publishers, in this office, there's a letterpress in your main reception room. And that letterpress is actually in the book. It's in the basement, and it plays a bit of a key role as well. Because if you've ever seen a letterpress,
you can't
really move it.
Yeah.
So if it's there, it's going to stay.
Yeah.
So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Susan and Rachel, for joining us
Thank you.
today. And we so appreciate everything you do for bookstores and libraries, of course. And viewers, of course, you can go and get the Oysterville Sewing Circle now at your favorite local bookshop or library. And then the Lost and Found Bookshop is going on sale next July, so keep your eyes peeled for developments there.
Okay.
And again, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.